Good afternoon. Today we are going to look at transitive phrasal verbs. Before we start, let's look at verbs and objects. Transitive verbs are verbs that accept an object. For example, the boy kicks the ball. Kicks is the verb, the ball is the object. Kick is a transitive verb. It accepts the ball, which is the object. On the other hand, intransitive verbs do not accept an object. For example, the boy arrives. Arrives is the verb. And this sentence has no object because arrives is an intransitive verb. Now let's talk about what phrasal verbs are. So what are phrasal verbs? Phrasal verbs are phrases that include a verb and a particle. For example, I turn off the TV. Particles are words like up, down, out, off, or in. For example, I turn off the TV. I turn on the TV. I turn in my homework. I turn up the volume. Each phrasal verb has a formal meaning, and if the particle changes, the meaning changes. For example, throw can accept the particle away and up, and changing the particle changes the meaning. For example, throw away. He throws away the food. Meaning, he puts the food in the trash. Throw up. For example, he throws up the food. Meaning, he vomits the food. Now let's talk about object placement. Most transitive phrasal verbs can accept an object before or after the particle. For example, before, I turned the volume down. After, I turned down the volume. You can see in I turned the volume down that the volume, that is the object, comes before down, that is the particle. And you can see in I turned down the volume that down, that is the particle, comes before the volume, that is the object. Which sentences are incorrect? A. I turn in it. B. I turn it in. C. I turn the 560 pilot test report in. D. I turn in the 560 pilot test report. Please take 10 seconds to think of the answers. A is incorrect because we don't place object pronouns such as it, her, and him after the particle. C is incorrect because longer objects should not come before the particle. Generally speaking, you want to end the sentence heavy. In other words, newer and longer information goes at the end of the sentence, and older and shorter information goes at the beginning. That is, object pronouns such as it, her, him, them, us, me, and you should come before the particle. For example, I turned it in. And we place longer objects after the particle. For example, I turned in the 560 pilot test report. Please note, it is not good to separate a verb from its particle with a long object. However, indefinite pronouns such as something, no one, someone, everything, and nothing can go before or after the particle. For example, before, I turned nothing in. After, I turned in nothing. To summarize, most objects can come before or after the particle. For example, I turned the volume down versus I turned down the volume. We put object pronouns before the particle. For example, I turn it in. We put longer objects after the particle. For example, I turn in the 560 pilot test reports. And indefinite pronouns such as something can go before or after. For example, she turned down something versus she turned something down. Now let's talk about transitive phrasal verbs that are separable and inseparable. Some transitive phrasal verbs accept objects only before the particle. They are only separable. On the other hand, some transitive phrasal verbs accept objects only after the particle. They are inseparable. And some transitive phrasal verbs accept objects before or after. They are both. Let's talk about the phrasal verbs that are both separable and inseparable. Remember that these phrasal verbs can accept objects before or after the particle. For example, before. I set my computer up. After. I set up my computer. Remember though that object pronouns such as me, you, him, her, it, us, and them must come before the particle. So it is correct to say, he points it out, but it is incorrect to say, he points out it. Now let's talk about phrasal verbs that are only separable. These phrasal verbs accept objects only before the particle. For example, start again. I started my project again. Do over. She did her application over. Call back. He called his mom back. Now, we are going to talk about phrasal verbs that are inseparable. These phrasal verbs accept objects only after the particle. For example, take over. I took over the group project. Go on. He went on swimming. And stick to. She sticks to her schedule. Please note that even object pronouns such as me, you, him, her, it, us, and them must come after the particle. So it is correct to say, I stuck to it, but it is incorrect to say, I stuck it to. So, to summarize, some phrasal verbs accept objects before or after the particle. For example, I turned my project in, and I turned in my project. Other phrasal verbs accept the objects only before the particles. For example, I started my project again. And inseparable phrasal verbs accept objects only after the particle. For example, I took over the group project. Now let's look at meaning. Please take 10 seconds to match the sentences on the left with the meaning on the right. Okay, go. Okay, number 1, she turned down the volume. Here, turn down means to lower. Number 2, she turned down the offer. Here, turn down means to reject. Number 3, I put away some money. Here, put away means to save for the future. And number 4, I put away my socks. Here, put away means to put in the correct place. So, some transitive phrasal verbs can have 2 or more meanings. For example, she turned down the volume means she lowered the volume. But she turned down the offer means she rejected the offer. Keep in mind that some phrasal verbs can be both transitive or intransitive. The object may be present or absent. However, if the object is not present, then the meaning may change. For example, we are working it out means we are solving it. And he is working out means he is exercising. Okay, to summarize, a transitive phrasal verb can have more than one meaning. For example, she turned down the volume means she lowered the volume, but she turned him down means she rejected him. Also note that if the object is not present, then the meaning may change. For example, we are working it out means we are solving it. But he is working out means he is exercising. Now let's do some 10-second practice questions. Please take 10 seconds to choose which words fit in the blank. Okay, go. Even though the work was hard, she stuck to the job. Stuck to is inseparable. The object must go after the particle. Next. They were having a hard time when their teacher pointed out the problem or pointed the problem out. Pointed out is separable and inseparable. The object may come before or after the particle. Next. He wanted to change his room, so he moved the furniture around. Move around is only separable. The object must come before the particle. Next. He was too late for the date, so she called it off. Call off is both separable and inseparable, but it is an object pronoun. It must come before the particle. Next. She ran into him. She was not happy. Run into is inseparable. The object must come after the particle. Next. He didn't hear the phone, so he had to call his wife back. Call back is only separable. The object must come before the particle. Next. She filled out the advanced training application. Fill out is both separable and inseparable, but the advanced training application is a long object. Well, this concludes my presentation. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please email me. And thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you in class. Have a good rest of your day.